And welcome back to the Touchline Talk show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. As I mentioned before the break, it is time for some transfer talk, starting with the semi-official move of Ilkay Gundogan to Barcelona. Fabrizio Romano has given it the here we go. It's not official yet, but everybody is in agreement this is what is happening, and Ilkay Gundogan has ultimately chosen Barcelona. So I feel comfortable talking about this because by the time of next week's show, it'll probably be, 3-4 days old, and he will have already taken his pictures and signed and done the official stuff. So I'm going to talk about it now. Obviously, his resume and his skill speaks for itself. The biggest part of this for me in the story here is that, once again, Barcelona have found a, relatively speaking, cheap way to get better. This team is not where it needs to be in terms of competing for a Champions League, and this team is also trying to stay ahead of a Real Madrid team that signed Jude Bellingham and is coming after a disappointing season. And now you have to go try and defend a La Liga title instead of chasing it as, the team trying to get back on top. Ilkay Gundogan is about the most efficient way to help all of that. He's going to be expensive, but this is the best option that Barcelona had out there in terms of a free transfer, in terms of somebody, you're not going to find another player, I would argue, available on the open market like this that is actually going to elevate that Barcelona midfield the way that Gundogan can. Because he's, these guys call. I think I saw something about a rumored $500 million Euro release clause or something like that. Now, he's not worth anything near that, but the point being, you're not supposed to be able to get a guy like this on a free transfer. So this is a home run for me. Barcelona had to find a way to get better, to improve that squad, and they had to find a way to do it without spending big money again, because everybody's watching them at this point. And they seem to have found a way to convince Gundogan they're going to be able to register him, and of course you get the benefit of not having a transfer fee. It's the best possible case scenario for Barcelona. Does it change how I feel about them versus Real Madrid? No, not really. I stand by what I said. Right now, they're the more reliable team in La Liga. And if you ask me which team has a better chance of winning the Champions League, the answer is Real Madrid. And now that Real Madrid have Jude Bellingham, even in La Liga, it's getting pretty close. But Gundogan is the kind of player that at least sort of forces me to pump the brakes on saying that Real Madrid have completely closed the gap and moved past Barcelona. I've gone on and on about Real Madrid. I don't need to do it here. If you listen to me, you know how I feel about them and the way that this is all being kind of presented in the narrative that's being formed. But this is, like I said, best case scenario. He was the one guy you probably could have made this work with if you're Barcelona and they ended up getting him. Congratulations. Excellent piece of business. I don't know that it changes all that much in terms of the ceiling, but you've got a lot of things you have to maintain and elevate, and Gundogan is going to help you do that. And then I want to spend just a few minutes talking about Chelsea. You got players coming in, you got players leaving, and most of those players that are leaving are headed to Saudi Arabia. Supposedly, it's looking like eventually you're going to get deals done for Edouard Mendy, Kalidou Koulibaly, and Hakim Ziyech, in addition to N'Golo Kante. Then you had Kai Havertz going to Arsenal, which again got a here we go from Fabrizio Romano, but is not officially announced yet. And Mateo Kovacic, I believe, is also a here we go to Manchester City. So I'm just going to talk about all of this collectively. Whether one of these deals ends up falling through for whatever reason, the broader points are the same. And as I mentioned with Gundogan, this could all be official in a matter of days and kind of outdated news by the time of next week's show. So the first thing here is Chelsea doing a terrific job finding a way to start getting guys away from this bloated squad and to start making this make sense. Getting a lot of help from Saudi Arabia to do it, but they're doing it nonetheless. And I encourage people to go read. I don't remember who the author is, I apologize, but The Athletic published a piece about the connections between Clear Lake Capital, the company that Todd Bowley is connected with, that kind of is the one that actually owns Chelsea. I don't remember all the details on that, but when you think Bowley, think Clear Lake Capital and the PIF and this idea that it's all kind of working together. And basically, the Athletics article talked to a bunch of experts who said that that's not really the case here. It's much more of just, this is a new place to appease players who are on really expensive contracts that the top clubs in Europe don't want anymore. Because it's hard to convince somebody to take these contracts and to convince the player they actually want to go to that club. And so Saudi Arabia is, and this was always kind of talked about, right, that it could become this place to get out of expensive contracts because they're willing to pay ridiculous amounts of money. And so Chelsea are taking advantage as the squad that needs in the world that needs to get rid of the most high profile, expensive players that aren't particularly valuable at this moment in time. And so it's starting to go that way. On the reverse side of this, Christopher Nkunku is finally, I believe, official. And it also appears that Nico Jackson is close to getting a deal done. I'm just going to talk more about Nkunku, but both of these I really like. I am a huge Christopher Nkunku guy. He is a significant upgrade to every other player they have in attack right now until somebody starts producing at a much higher level. He was sensational and has been for Leipzig. He's the kind of player that they've been trying to find with all this money they've been spending. And none of these guys are on his level, at least yet. Not yet. And from a production standpoint, maybe Raheem Sterling kind of was at one point, but he wasn't last season. This, to me, has the potential to be one of the signings of the season in terms of most impactful players. That's how highly I think of him. Now, the interesting part of this is you look at most of the guys who are leaving. They do not play the same position. Now, Hakim Ziyech does. But they don't play the same position as Christopher Nkunku. This midfield is Enzo Fernandez, maybe Conor Gallagher, maybe Callum Hudson-Odoi, maybe Mason Mount, and that's about it. And you've heard at least some level of transfer speculation with all of those guys except for Enzo Fernandez. He's the one dude who's going to be here. But you're hearing about maybe Hudson-Odoi. Manchester United, it seems, are trying to pry Mason Mount away. And so the overall construction of this roster is still so unbalanced with all of these wingers. And no number 9. Now, yeah, you could play Nkunku through the middle, and maybe that's what happens. I don't know what the plan is. Now, Romelu Lukaku is currently a Chelsea player. I don't see that continuing. But you need to reinforce that midfield still, even if you keep some of the guys I just mentioned. But especially if Mason Mount goes. And you could use another center back. You still got a bunch of outside backs, not all of whom can play at the same time. It is still kind of a mess. But it's a mess that makes more sense at least. And The other thing you did is you finally actually got a player that's going to make your team better. Because Nkunku is way more accomplished than any of these other guys they brought in over the last year. Way more. He is on a whole different level. So it still doesn't solve the problem, but you're making progress. They're having a very good summer based on where they started. The problem is you have to also remember where they started. You know, it's kind of the I don't want to celebrate you for doing what you kind of had to do because you had no other choice, right? And then the final thing I want to talk about here is the Kai Havertz to Arsenal that appears to be any day, any hour officially announced. I don't get this for Arsenal, especially at the rumored price tag. I don't know what they need him for. I don't know where he fits into that starting lineup. This is a team that also has, you know, 4 strikers, 3 of which produced at a good level last season. I know Gabriel Jesus kind of tailed off and then got hurt, and you know, it looked like he was on the, you know, going to have this phenomenal season at the beginning when he was contributing a goal every game, it seemed like. And even when he played more, it didn't end up being that. Sorry. But you're certainly not expecting Kai Havertz to be the one to solve that problem. I trust Gabriel Jesus way more than I trust Kai Havertz. And you're not playing him underneath because that's your captain. And arguably your best player. So to me, the only way this makes sense is for him to be the second, you know, the cover for Martin Odegaard and the cover for Gabriel Jesus. And you are paying way too much to have a guy come off your bench. I don't see where there's a spot in the starting lineup for him. It's the same thing with Spurs and Richarlison last season. And at least there, you know, you went, okay, they have a front 3 that is difficult to break into, but you're not going to use that front 3 in every single game. Richarlison gave you that 4th option to play in a Champions League group stage game or to start in the Premier League the weekend before the Champions League game. Things like that. You need more than 3 reliable strikers. So even though it was a disastrous season, there was some logic in that idea of we need to go get another really good attacker. Arsenal already have Saka, Martinelli, Odegaard, Trossard. You can throw Eddie Nketiah in there if you want. And then, you know, your other academy products. I mean, Lauren Balogun, currently an Arsenal player, scored 20-plus goals in Ligue 1 last season. And now you're throwing Kai Havertz into that. And one of the things that Arsenal really improved at last season was finishing. And Kai Havertz doesn't do that. I just don't see where he elevates this team. And if you're paying that much for somebody, they better elevate your team. Now, clearly Mikel Arteta sees something, and maybe he can get more out of him. You know, he looked like a genius for getting Jesus there for a little while until it all, you know, he had the bad stretch and then the injury and all that. So, really difficult to judge just how good of a signing that was and how good he actually is when he's kind of leading an attack. But if I'm a fellow top four competitor, I am not bailing Chelsea out that way and giving something close to quote unquote market value for Kai Havertz. I am fascinated to see how this goes because Arsenal already have four starting attackers. Because Trossard was great, and he's their fourth best attacker. And also, Kai Havertz isn't playing on the wing. To me, if there's something you want, I mean, I guess you. Nah, take that back. I know I'm not the only one that's scratching my head on about this. Whatever he provides in terms of these dangerous runs and getting into good positions, Arsenal don't need more of that. They do just fine. They could use another playmaker. And especially if this ends up being a Odegaard, Rice, somebody else midfield. And I guess maybe that's that you play Odegaard deeper. I don't get what the plan is. I'm gonna be very curious to see what these lineups look like and whether Kai Havertz is a starter. Because the money tells you he has to be. Otherwise, you just wasted a lot on a guy you could have found somebody. Right? If you're looking for a supporting, kind of a high-profile supporting person to add to the attack, go after James Maddison. There's no way he's going to cost you more than Kai Havertz if this money is true. I think it's something like $60 million. Go swoop in and take James Maddison. You can play him next to Martin Odegaard. He's going to give you something. He's going to give you a creativity that you don't have outside of Odegaard right now. Kai Havertz isn't that guy. He's not a finisher. He's not a creator. So that just kind of leaves you wondering, what exactly does he do really well? And I know the analytics people will tell you he makes good runs. He gets into good positions. There is some value in that for specific teams. But when the system works as well as Arsenal's system works, and when you have other guys who get into those good positions and who are really good finishers, specifically your two wingers, where does that leave him? I'm just going in circles at this point. This one just really confuses me. And certainly, if you're an Arsenal fan, you have to hope that this is completely independent of Declan Rice. Declan Rice has to be priority number one. Because it looks like you might be losing both other midfielders, and he is significantly better than both other midfielders anyway. He is the kind of guy who takes you to the next level. You get him, and you get a healthy William Saliba, we might just have ourselves a title race next season. Especially if Manchester City aren't able to hold on to some of these pieces and aren't able to bring in some big signings. I mean, Mateo Kovacic is fine. He's a nice depth piece. I'm not concerned about him if I'm Arsenal. I am more concerned about Josko Gvardiol. But even then, that's a team that doesn't give up many goals anyway. It just seems like a really, really expensive price to pay for something you're not really sure what you're getting. But Mikel Arteta's earned the benefit of the doubt. If he sees something here, I will give him all the credit in the world if it works. Because it seems that everybody's kind of in agreement that this is very strange.